You know, for years, the small West African nation of Benin wasn't just another country. It was a symbol, a real model of democracy for the entire continent. But in the last decade, that shining reputation has pretty much collapsed. So the big question we're digging into here is, what on earth happened to one of Africa's most promising democracies?
And hey, it's not just a few people whispering about this. Major international observers have been sounding the alarm. I mean, publications like The Economist are putting it this bluntly. A headline like this, it just paints such a stark picture of a nation at a crossroads. It's a powerful way to set the stage for the story we're about to unpack.
And this right here is the heart of it all. It's really a tale of two completely different Benins. On one side, you have the Benin of 1991, this trailblazer that kicked off a whole wave of democratic change across Africa. And on the other, you have the Benin of today. It's now called a hybrid system, which is basically a mix of authoritarian control dressed up with some of the appearances of democracy. So how did a beacon of hope become such a cautionary tale?
To really get the scale of this fall, we first have to understand the height from which it fell. So let's rewind a bit and look at Benin's celebrated democratic origins, because it was something special. Look, this democracy was not just handed to them, it was a hard-fought battle. After a military coup in '72 and then 17 long years of a Marxist-Leninist dictatorship, the people of Benin just had enough. By 1989, you had these massive protests and strikes that brought the whole country to a standstill. And all that pressure from the people led to Africa's very first national conference in 1990. Think about that. Delegates from all walks of life came together and hammered out a new democratic constitution, paving the way for free elections.
And what happened next was truly historic. In 1991, the longtime dictator Mathieu Crécu was peacefully voted out of office. That just didn't happen in mainland sub-Saharan Africa at the time. It was basically unprecedented. With that one election, Benin set the gold standard for democratic transition for a generation.
But that amazing democratic promise, it began to fade. And that brings us to the country's sharp authoritarian turn and how things started to go so wrong.
So where did the shift really begin? Well, a lot of people point to 2016 and the election of President Patrice Talon. He was this incredibly powerful businessman known as the Cotton King, and his presidency really marked the beginning of a profound and systematic change in the country's politics.
And this consolidation of power was so methodical. It was like a step-by-step playbook. First, new electoral rules pop up in 2018. Then, using those new rules as the reason, the Electoral Commission bars every single opposition party from the 2019 parliamentary elections. Just poof, they're gone. The result? You get a parliament made up entirely of Talon supporters. And what do? Well, they change the laws again, making it so that any presidential candidate has to get a stamp of approval from MPs and mayors, who, of course, are now almost all loyal to the president. It's a closed loop.
And if you want to see the result of those changes, well, just look at the numbers. In that landmark 1991 election, you had a real race, and the opposition candidate won with 67% of the vote. Fast forward 30 years to 2021, the incumbent, President Talon, wins with 86% in an election boycotted by most of the opposition because, well, they were effectively locked out of the race. The numbers really do speak for themselves.
But sidelining the opposition wasn't just about changing the rules of the game. It also involved actively silencing anyone who spoke out. And that brings us to the tools of repression. Okay, so a key institution we have to talk about here is the CRIET. Now, officially, this special court was created in 2018 to fight serious stuff like corruption and terrorism. But critics, and we're talking human rights groups, lawyers, even former judges, they allege that it's been turned into a weapon by the president to just neutralize political rivals. And if you think that sounds extreme, just listen to this. This is an absolutely explosive quote from Weaponization. He was a CRET judge who literally had to flee Benin and seek asylum in France. He claims he was pressured to jail a key opposition figure with zero evidence. He said they received an empty file and a threat. A threat. I mean, that's a direct accusation that the judiciary is under siege. And it's not just the judiciary feeling the pressure. Look at this. The country's ranking for press freedom. Back in 2012, Benin was ranked 25th in the entire world. That was ahead of countries like the UK or the US. By 2023, it had plummeted to 121st place. That isn't a slide, that's a free fall. It shows a much broader crackdown on any kind of free expression.
So, to understand the real human cost of all of this, let's just look at one case, Reckya Madougou. She was a leading opposition figure, a former government minister and a very serious contender for the presidency.
In 2021, right before the presidential election, an election her candidacy was rejected from, she was arrested. And that special court, the CRIET, sentenced her to 20 years in prison. The charge? Financing terrorism, an accusation her lawyers and that former judge we just heard from say is completely fabricated. 20 years.
But even facing that verdict, Madougou's words to the court were just incredibly defiant. She basically framed her conviction as a sacrifice for democracy. It's such a powerful statement, and it really highlights the insane stakes for anyone who dares to challenge the status quo.
Now, of course, Benin's internal politics aren't happening in a vacuum. The country is also getting squeezed by these immense external pressures, both on the economic front and from what's happening in the region.
Let's talk about the economy for a second. Benin is incredibly dependent on agriculture. As you can see here, farm products and food make up over 65% of its export revenue. That kind of reliance, especially on one crop like cotton, makes your entire economy extremely vulnerable to shocks in global prices, not to mention climate change.
So you've really got this mixed picture. On the one hand, yeah, Benin has implemented some effective reforms, and it gets a lot of international support. But on the other, it's wide open to that regional violence spilling over from the Sahel, and it's still super vulnerable to those economic and climate shocks.
And that regional instability is a huge, huge deal. You have jihadist violence from neighbors like Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso literally spilling into northern Benin. Then you add border closures because of military coups, shaky food security, and climate disasters, and you basically have a perfect storm of pressures that can fuel social unrest and put immense strain on the government.
So, given everything we've just talked about, how does the rest of the world see Benin today? What's the view from the outside?
Well, the international view is deeply, deeply concerned. The U.S. State Department, Freedom House, The Economist, the African Commission on Human Rights, they've all raised major red flags. Their reports all point to the same things: political prisoners, a compromised judiciary, violent crackdowns on protests, and a justice system being used as a weapon against opponents. The consensus is crystal clear. Something is seriously wrong in Benin.
It's really incredible when you step back. Benin's story has completely flipped. It's gone from this inspiring example of what's possible to a stark, cautionary tale about just how quickly and fragile democratic institutions can be.
And all this leaves us with one critical, lingering question for the future. Can a nation that once lit the way for democracy in Africa find its way back from the brink? Right now, that remains the profound challenge for the people of Benin.